Today, we're going to ask the question, what if Luffy and Ace had both awakened their devil fruits at Marineford? This single twist would change not just the outcome of the war, but the entire balance of power in the One Piece world. So grab a drink, settle in, because for the next 2 hours, we're going to walk through this alternate history step by step, imagining how events would unfold if both brothers pushed past their limits in the most dramatic moment of their lives. And as always, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Because trust me, this one is going to spark a lot of discussion. Marineford is one of the most important arcs in the entire series. It's the culmination of everything leading up from the moment Ace was captured, through the war preparations, and finally to that massive clash between the Whitebeard Pirates and the Navy. It's a battle that defines the new era, not just because of who died, but because of what was revealed about the balance of power. Whitebeard versus the Admirals, Ace's tragic end, and Luffy's desperate attempts to save his brother. All of it comes together in a storm of emotions and consequences. But imagine if we change one key detail. Instead of Ace dying and Luffy exhausting himself into unconsciousness, both brothers awaken their devil fruits. Suddenly, the tide of the war changes completely. To understand the weight of this change, we need to remind ourselves what awakening actually means. In the world of One Piece, awakening is the ultimate stage of devil fruit mastery. It's when the fruit's powers transcend the user's body and begin to affect the environment itself. We've seen this with Doflamingo, who could turn the ground and buildings into strings, or Katakuri, who could manipulate Mochi far beyond his own body. Even the jailer beasts in Impelled Down had that eerie regenerative awakening. It's not just an upgrade in strength, it's a qualitative leap, a transformation that pushes a devil fruit into godlike territory. And if there's any moment where both Luffy and Ace could be forced into awakening, it's Marineford. Let's start with Ace. At Marineford, Ace's death comes at the hands of Akainu. He throws himself in front of Luffy to protect his younger brother, taking a magma punch straight through his chest. It's one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire story, and it defines Luffy's trauma going forward. But what if, at that exact instant, Ace's will to live and his desperate desire to protect Luffy triggered the awakening of the Mera Mera Nomi? Instead of being impaled, his body could erupt in a surge of flames hotter and more destructive than anything he's ever conjured. Awakening could allow his fire to match the intensity of magma, to stand against Akainu as an equal, rather than being completely overpowered. Suddenly, Ace isn't just a Logia user fighting on the Admirals level. He's a force of nature, a fire god capable of reshaping the battlefield. Now consider Luffy. During Marineford, Luffy is already at his breaking point. He's pushed past exhaustion. He's fought in Impelled Down. He's poisoned, injured, and still charging headfirst into the Navy's strongest fortress. He manages to unlock Conqueror's Haki for the first time, but even that isn't enough to save Ace. If Ace's awakening came in the moment of near death, Luffy's awakening would come in the aftermath, when the trauma of nearly losing his brother and the sheer desperation to protect him finally unlocks the hidden potential of his fruit. Remember, the Gomu Gomu no Mi isn't just rubber, it's the mythical Zoan fruit tied to the sun god Nika. An awakening at Marineford could foreshadow everything we later see in Wano. His body would take on properties far beyond rubber, with cartoonish physics and a reality-bending freedom that shocks even the Admirals. Instead of collapsing, Luffy becomes an uncontainable force, stretching and reshaping the battlefield itself to protect his brother. So in this alternate timeline, the setup to Marineford is the same. The Whitebeard Pirates clash with the Navy, the Admirals show their terrifying might, and Luffy storms in to save Ace. We reach the execution platform, and through Luffy's sheer will and the help of allies, Ace is freed, the Marines regroup, Sengoku and Garp move to intervene, and Akainu begins his assault. At this point in canon, Whitebeard has already taken fatal injuries and is reaching his limits. Ace, moved by Whitebeard's sacrifice, stands to fight. But Akainu provokes him with insults to Whitebeard's name. Their clash leads to Ace's death. But here, when Akainu launches his killing blow, Ace's fire suddenly erupts with an intensity no one has ever seen. Instead of being pierced, his body dissolves into flames that ignite the entire plaza. The air itself seems to combust, and for a moment even Akainu is forced back. Marines shield their eyes from the blinding light, and pirates roar in astonishment. Ace's awakening has arrived. The battlefield becomes hell on earth. Walls of flame rise around Marineford, forcing Marines to retreat and shielding the pirates. Akainu counters with magma, and the plaza turns into a cataclysm of fire and molten rock. Buildings melt, the ocean itself steams, and the cries of soldiers fill the air. Ace's flames, no longer simple fire, start to alter the environment itself. Air currents twist, oxygen burns away, and every breath becomes a struggle. This is what it means to be awakened. Whitebeard's men see their commander's son standing like a god of fire, holding off the Navy's strongest. For the first time in the war, it looks like hope. Meanwhile, Luffy is pushed past his limits once again. The sheer heat, the chaos, the sight of his brother nearly dying. It awakens something deep within him. His heartbeat races. His body begins to thrum with that strange rhythm we'll later know as the drums of liberation. His rubber body stretches and rebounds in ways it never has before. He slams his fists into the ground, and instead of cracking stone, the entire plaza ripples like rubber. Marines stumble, cannons bend, and even pacifistas malfunction as their beams curve. Luffy's awakening has taken hold. He becomes unpredictable, untouchable, a living embodiment of freedom that turns Marineford into his playground. In canon, Luffy was a desperate boy out of his depth. In this timeline, he is a legend in the making, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brother against the world. The shock on the faces of the Marines would be immense. Sengoku, who has lived through countless eras, would realize the threat immediately. Garp, torn between duty and family, would see the terrifying potential of his grandson realized too early. The Admirals, already struggling against Whitebeard's fury, now face not one, but two awakened monsters. The balance of power tips dramatically. Marco and the other commanders, inspired by Ace and Luffy's display, rally with renewed vigor. Pirates who had been fleeing or losing hope now surge forward. Marineford is no longer the execution ground of Ace. It is the birthplace of a legend. From here, the first chapter of this story sets the stage for everything that follows. The war is no longer about whether Ace will be executed, but whether the Marines can even contain the chaos. Blackbeard, lurking in the shadows, now has to reconsider his timing. Shanks on his way may find an entirely different scene awaiting him. The world itself, watching through the broadcasts, would see not tragedy, but miracle. The son of Goldie Roger and the grandson of Garp standing together, awakened and unstoppable. The very foundations of the world government's authority begin to crack. But we can't jump too far ahead yet. In this opening segment, the focus is on building the tension of what it means for Ace and Luffy to awaken. We've painted the picture of their powers unleashed, the shock it creates on the battlefield, and the emotional weight of seeing the brothers together in their prime. It's the spark that ignites the alternate Marineford War. And in the chapters to come, we'll walk step by step through each clash, each shift in the battle, and the ripple effects that extend far beyond Marineford itself. Because when two legends awaken at once, the world will never be the same. The moment Ace's flames erupted across the battlefield, Marineford itself became a vision of apocalypse. The plaza burned in waves of fire so hot that even seasoned Marines felt their skins sting from the heat, and the air shimmered like a mirage. The execution platform, once a symbol of the world government's power, stood engulfed in light as if the heavens themselves had chosen to descend in judgment. For the pirates, who had watched their morale waver with every passing second, it felt like salvation had arrived. For the Marines, it was something else entirely. They were soldiers trained to face pirates, criminals, even monsters. But this was different. This was an awakening, the rarest and most terrifying evolution of a devil fruit. And it had happened to the son of Goldie Roger at the worst possible moment. Akainu, furious that his killing blow had been thwarted, roared as his magma fists clashed with the torrents of fire. He had always believed magma was superior to fire, that his justice would consume the weak embers of rebellion. But Ace's awakening was no ember. His flames bent and twisted reality itself, generating storms of heat that rose into the skies. Lava hardened into brittle stone as it was robbed of its vitality by air so superheated it couldn't sustain combustion. For the first time in years, Sakazuki felt his element pushed back, forced to recognize that his certainty of superiority was cracking. Marines scrambled to obey his orders, but their ranks faltered in the heat. Gunpowder refused to ignite properly, and cannons melted before they could even be fired. Ace wasn't just fighting Akainu, he was warping the battlefield to his will. At the same time, Luffy's awakening had left the plaza in chaos of a different kind. Where Ace's flames burned with divine fury, Luffy's rubber reshaped the battlefield into something surreal. The very ground rippled like a trampoline as Marines charged, causing them to stumble, bounce, or sink waist-deep into walls that had inexplicably softened like putty. Pacifistas fired laser beams only for Luffy to stretch his hands impossibly wide and redirect the blasts as though he were bending light itself through a rubber lens. Admirals like Kizaru found their speed advantage muted, as every kick or light beam distorted unpredictably in Luffy's warped zone of influence. What should have been an orderly fortress of marine might now felt like a carnival gone mad. To the pirates, it was liberation, laughter in the face of certain doom. To the Marines, it was nightmare, law and order slipping out of their hands. Whitebeard, standing tall despite the wounds that would soon claim him in the canon timeline, watched with a smile that twisted the lines of pain on his face into something proud. His sons, his legacy, were rewriting the very end of his life. In the real timeline, Whitebeard fought to the bitter end, sacrificing himself so Ace could escape, only for Ace to die anyway. Here, he saw Ace's flames towering high, Luffy standing as a living legend, and for a moment, the pain in his chest eased. He slammed his Bacento into the ground, creating another quake that split Marineford's plaza wide open. The ground shattered, but the rubber-like ripples Luffy unconsciously extended through his awakening absorbed some of the shock, turning destruction into an unsteady, rolling surface. Pirates cheered. The very world seemed to move with them. Sengoku, standing at the execution platform in his Buddha form, knew the battle was spiraling out of control. His golden body glistened with sweat, not from fear, but from the sweltering heat Ace had unleashed. He barked orders to the remaining vice admirals, but even their willpower faltered. How could ordinary soldiers face this? He knew awakening when he saw it. He had studied it in secret reports from Impelled Down and from the elders themselves. To see two awakenings bloom simultaneously, and in the hands of brothers tied so closely to the Pirate King, was nothing short of disaster. His instincts told him the battle needed to end now, before Marineford fell into utter ruin, but ending it was easier said than done. Not even he was sure he could match two awakened fruits and Whitebeard's quakes together. Garp, still standing at the platform's edge, clenched his fists. His grandson awakened already, a pirate whose potential dwarfed even dragons. His other grandson, Roger's son, alive when he should have died, blazing with the power of fire itself. His heart screamed for him to intervene, to protect them, to fight with them, but his duty bound him to the Marines. Tears he would never show welled up inside him. This was the family curse, bloodlines that tore at the very foundations of the world. He had thrown cannonballs at Roger for years, but never had he felt this powerless. He knew one thing. If he moved now, it would change everything. But for the moment, he stood frozen, torn between love and justice. On the ground, the pirates were electrified. Marco the Phoenix swooped in, his blue flames dancing alongside Ace's inferno. Jozu, despite his injuries, lifted chunks of shattered plaza and hurled them at Marines. Vista clashed with Mihawk again, but this time the momentum was different. The swordsmen of the Whitebeard Pirates fought with renewed fury, his captain's sons standing as gods among men. Even the escaped prisoners from Impel Down, like Crocodile and Daz Bones, paused in awe at the scene before them. Crocodile smirked, recognizing the power play. He had always underestimated Luffy, but seeing him bend the battlefield itself, perhaps the boy was truly destined to be Pirate King. The Marines did not crumble easily. Aokiji, calm as ever, countered by freezing massive swaths of the plaza to quell the flames, creating an ice barrier to slow Ace's advance. But Ace's awakening burned so hot that the ice cracked and melted almost instantly, sending rivers of steam flooding the air. Kizaru attempted to flank Luffy, using his speed to pierce the chaos, but every attack bent at strange angles, light refracting as if the air itself had turned to rubber. Even Borsalino's laid-back demeanor faltered as he realized his fruit was being disrupted, in ways he didn't fully understand. Marines shouted in confusion, reports flying that they couldn't coordinate their formations, that Denden Mushi cameras were melting, that command structures were breaking apart. Marineford, the unshakable fortress, was unraveling. Akainu, however, refused to bend. His rage intensified, magma spewing in torrents as he pushed against Ace's flames. "Your fire is still weaker than justice," he shouted, his voice echoing like thunder across the plaza. But Ace, his body glowing like the core of a sun, didn't falter. "This fire is my will. It's not weaker than anyone's justice." Their clash turned the skies crimson, an inferno and volcano locked in combat that threatened to annihilate everything in between. Whitebeard's men rushed to support, while Marines tried to reinforce their admiral, but few could even approach the battlefield without being incinerated or scorched. It was a fight only monsters could endure. Meanwhile, Luffy tore through the battlefield with unrestrained creativity. He swung his arms like massive rubber bands, launching Marines into the sky. He caught cannonballs mid-air, stretching them back before launching them into the sea like skipping stones. When a squad of pacifistas cornered him, he slammed his fists into the ground, turning it into a massive trampoline that sent the cyborgs crashing into each other in midair. His laughter, wild and defiant, echoed across Marineford. It wasn't forced. This was the freedom his fruit embodied, the very essence of Nika breaking through for the first time. Pirates who had been weeping minutes earlier now laughed with him, their fear dissolving into joy. It was infectious, a rhythm that made even hardened killers feel like children again. The drums of liberation beat for the first time in the age of the Whitebeard War. Sengoku could see it clearly. If this battle continued, Marineford itself would fall. The island could be destroyed, not just by Whitebeard's quakes, but by the combined chaos of Ace and Luffy's awakenings. He had to act, but his golden body was pinned down by Marco, and Garp's indecision left the command structure strained. "All units!" he roared, his voice amplified by his Buddha form. "Prioritize the protection of civilians and retreat to the second line of defense." It was a shocking order. Never had the Navy ordered retreat in the middle of a war. But Sengoku knew the truth. They couldn't hold Marineford in this state. The optics would be catastrophic, but total annihilation would be worse. On the pirate side, Whitebeard's forces recognized the shift immediately. "We can win!" they shouted, voices ringing with hope. But Whitebeard himself knew better. His body was failing, wounds too deep to recover from. Yet he looked at Ace and Luffy, standing united, and he knew his death would not be in vain. He raised his Basento again, his voice booming. "My sons, the future is yours. Leave this place alive and carry on my will." His quake shattered the air once more, opening a path toward the sea. He intended to give them an escape, to ensure their survival even if it cost his own. The Marines, however, weren't finished. From the rear lines, more forces surged forward. Vice Admirals, pacifistas, and even the warlords of the sea, each with their own agenda. Doflamingo laughed wildly, fascinated by Luffy's awakening. "Fufufu. So the brat's already playing at God, huh? This war just got fun." Boa Hancock, torn between her duty as a warlord and her love for Luffy, struck down Marines who aimed for him, declaring openly that anyone who harmed him would die by her hand. Mihawk, still testing his blade against Vista, spared a glance toward Luffy and muttered that perhaps he truly was the most dangerous man of the future. The battlefield was now not simply Marines versus pirates. It was a free-for-all, a maelstrom of clashing wills. And through it all, Blackbeard had yet to arrive. In the canon timeline, his entry after Whitebeard's death shifted the balance completely. Here, his timing would be far more precarious. He would not find a defeated Whitebeard and a broken pirate crew. He would find two awakened brothers, Whitebeard still alive, and a navy in retreat. For the first time, Teach's plan seemed at risk of crumbling, but that twist would come later. For now, Marineford itself was teetering on the edge of collapse. The image is burned into the minds of all who witness it, Ace blazing like a sun, holding back the wrath of magma. Luffy, laughing as he bends the battlefield into his toy. Whitebeard, standing tall despite his mortal wounds, quaking the world apart. And the Marines, for the first time in history, forced onto the back foot. The war is no longer about execution. It is about survival, about whether the world government can endure the storm unleashed by two brothers whose awakenings have rewritten destiny. The world watches, and the age of pirates begins to shift into something even the Gorosei had never predicted. The plaza trembled under the weight of power unlike anything Marineford had ever endured. From every corner of the battlefield, the clash of awakened fruits, quakes, magma, and steel was transforming the stronghold of the Marines into a crumbling ruin. Smoke, steam, and fire blurred the skies into a violent canvas of red and black, while the screams of soldiers and pirates mingled with the deafening roar of collapsing stone. At the center of it all stood Ace and Luffy, their bodies radiating the unmistakable aura of awakened power. Two forces of nature fighting not for conquest, but for survival and freedom. To the Marines, it looked like a nightmare unraveling the very order of the world. To the pirates, it looked like destiny itself had decided to fight on their side. Akainu's fists burned with molten rage as he hurled magma like meteors, each blast large enough to annihilate platoons of men. But Ace's awakening wrapped the plaza in a protective curtain of fire. His flames no longer flickered as ordinary fire. They roared and surged like living creatures, forming serpents and wings that struck out at the Admiral with divine fury. Their collision was an apocalyptic display, red and orange colliding with black and crimson, bursts of light so bright they blinded everyone nearby. Marines who dared to approach collapsed from heatstroke, their uniforms smoldering just by being too close. Even the ground beneath their feet turned to molten rock as magma and fire fought for dominance. Akainu's face twisted into fury, veins bulging in his forehead. He had killed Ace once already in his mind, and the idea that the boy could defy his justice even at death's door filled him with a rage that bordered on madness. "Your father's will dies with you," he roared, hurling another volcanic eruption across the plaza. But Ace, standing taller than ever, his body shimmering with fire so intense it distorted the air, answered with equal fury. "I'm not my father's shadow. I'm his son, and I'll burn my own path." His flames engulfed the attack, creating an explosion that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Luffy, meanwhile, had turned Marineford into something unrecognizable. His laughter echoed across the plaza, not from arrogance, but from the joy of fighting without chains, the freedom that his fruit embodied. Marines tried to surround him, only to find the ground beneath them bouncing like a trampoline, tossing them skyward. Cannons and rifles bent like rubber, their shots firing back at their owners. A giant vice admiral swung his blade, only for Luffy to grab the steel mid-swing, stretch it back like elastic, and release it, sending the weapon flying across the plaza. Every move was unpredictable, a nightmare for soldiers trained to follow rigid tactics. Even Aokiji, calm and analytical, found his strategies disrupted. He froze waves of pirates, only for Luffy to slap the frozen blocks like balls of rubber, bouncing them back at the Marines as if the ice itself had become his weapon. It was absurd, surreal, but effective beyond measure. The air carried the rhythm of his heartbeat, that strange liberation drum no one could name. And with every pulse, his allies fought harder, laughed louder, and believed more strongly that victory was within reach. Whitebeard, watching all this unfold, could feel the weight of the new era pressing down on him. His vision blurred, his breath came heavy, but his heart was filled with pride. These boys, his son and his son's brother, were carrying the torch forward. He swung his Bacento with renewed vigor, splitting the skies once again. The shockwaves tore through the marine lines, scattering battleships like toys in a storm. Sengoku roared in defiance, his Buddha form radiating golden light as he fought to hold the line. But even he knew this was no longer a war he could control. His mind raced through calculations, weighing the damage to Marineford, the losses mounting by the second, the humiliation of retreat. But worse than all of that was the broadcast. The entire world was watching. Across the seas, in taverns and villages, on pirate ships and marine bases, Denden Mushi transponders transmitted the sight of Ace burning like the sun, Luffy warping reality with his rubber awakening, and Whitebeard still standing unbroken. The image alone was enough to shake the foundations of the world government's authority. On the battlefield, allies who had been wavering found their courage. Pirates from allied crews, once hesitant against the might of the Marines, surged forward with reckless abandon. Jinbe fought like a tidal wave, using fishman karate to hurl entire platoons aside. Crocodile, seeing the opportunity, unleashed massive sandstorms that clashed with marine formations, laughing as he declared that this war was no longer just Whitebeard's. It was everyone's rebellion. Even Buggy, ever the opportunist, stood taller in the chaos, realizing the cameras were catching every moment. His followers cheered him on, mistaking his cowardice for strategic brilliance, and his image grew into that of a hero. Every soul on the pirate side was swept up in the tidal wave of momentum, all because two brothers had refused to fall. But not all Marines faltered. Akainu pressed forward with unrelenting fury, every step he took leaving pools of magma boiling in his wake. Kizaru tried to flank Ace, sending beams of light at impossible speeds, but Luffy intercepted, grabbing the beams as if they were tangible and twisting them away, a feat so absurd it left even the Admiral wide-eyed. Aokiji, recognizing the stalemate, shifted his focus to freezing massive sections of the bay, attempting to cut off escape routes and prevent reinforcements. Sengoku continued to clash with Whitebeard's commanders, his golden fists crashing into Marco's phoenix flames and Vista's blades. The war was still raging, and the cost of every second grew higher. In the midst of this chaos, the emotional weight of the moment could not be ignored. Garp stood frozen, his fists trembling. He had devoted his life to the Marines, to justice, to fighting the pirate era. Yet now he saw his grandson embodying something far greater than mere piracy. He saw freedom itself, the same freedom Roger had embodied, but now magnified in the laughter of a boy who refused to be broken. His heart screamed for him to act, but which side was justice? Could he strike down his grandson in front of the world? Could he let his son's son, Ace, burn away under the Admiral's fury? His indecision cost him time, but the conflict inside him was eating him alive. As the battle raged, the environment itself began to crumble under the strain. Ace's firestorms consumed the sky, blotting out the sun. Luffy's rubber awakening distorted the plaza, stretching buildings and cracking walls. Whitebeard's quakes shattered the very air, leaving fissures in the ocean that sucked ships into whirlpools. The once mighty Marineford, symbol of order and justice, looked like a dying island. Even the most hardened Marines felt despair creep in, their faith in victory slipping away. Yet they fought because retreat was unthinkable. For every pirate that roared in triumph, there was a Marine who clenched their teeth and charged again, driven by duty, if not by hope. And then came the moment that shifted everything again. Akainu, furious at his stalemate with Ace, unleashed a massive volcanic eruption, hurling molten rock across the battlefield in a desperate bid to annihilate everything in his path. The sky rained fire, magma bombs crashing down indiscriminately on both Marines and pirates. The plaza erupted in chaos, screams echoing as the ground melted. It was the kind of attack meant to end a war in one strike. But Ace, eyes blazing with determination, spread his arms wide. His flames surged upward, colliding with the volcanic rain. For a moment, the sky turned into a second sun, so bright it seemed like midday had exploded into eternity. Fire consumed magma, magma consumed fire, and in the heart of that collision, Ace stood like a god reborn. His awakening had not only saved his life, but given him the strength to protect thousands in an instant. The pirates roared his name, their faith absolute. At the same time, Luffy charged forward toward the Admirals, his fists stretched back farther than ever before. His heartbeat thundered, his laughter filled the air, and his body twisted into a form that looked absurd yet terrifyingly powerful. He slammed his fist down, and the entire plaza rippled outward in a wave of rubber, launching Marines off their feet and toppling entire buildings. Admirals braced themselves, but the sheer unpredictability of his attacks left them reeling. Luffy wasn't just fighting. He was embodying something untouchable, a freedom that no chain, no wall, no power could contain. The world watched in silence as this unfolded. In taverns across the seas, in villages under the shadow of marine oppression, in pirate dens and revolutionary hideouts, the Den Mushi broadcasts transmitted images of Ace and Luffy fighting like gods. For the oppressed, it was hope. For the pirates, it was inspiration. For the Marines, it was fear. And for the world government, it was the worst-case scenario. The Gorosei, watching from Marijois, exchanged grim looks. Two awakenings at once, both tied to dangerous bloodlines, both unfolding live for the world to see. They knew this war was no longer about capturing Ace. It was about containing a legend before it spread uncontrollably. Yet the legend was already born. Every second Ace and Luffy stood tall. Every attack they unleashed, every laugh and roar, etched itself into the minds of millions. Even if Marineford were somehow reclaimed, the damage was done. The age of pirates was entering a new chapter, one that no admiral, no warlord, no world government could fully control. And still, the war was not finished. Whitebeard, coughing blood, raised his bacento once more. He knew his end was near, but he also knew his purpose. He would hold the line until his sons escaped, no matter the cost. His quakes tore open the bay, creating a path to the sea. "Go, Ace! Go, Luffy! The future is waiting for you!" he roared. His voice carried above the flames, the rubber, the chaos, a father's final command to his children. The pirates surged toward the opening, their hope renewed. But the Marines, desperate and enraged, rushed to cut them off. The battlefield reached its boiling point, the moment where everything would either collapse or break free. Marineford is unrecognizable, a hellscape of fire and quake, rubber and ruin. Ace and Akainu are locked in a battle of gods, fire and magma colliding in the sky. Luffy bends the world itself, his laughter echoing across the battlefield as he pushes admirals to their limits. Whitebeard holds the line with his final strength, ensuring his sons can escape. The Marines, their fortress crumbling, their faith shaken, fight on in desperation. And in the shadows, unseen but approaching, Blackbeard and his crew draw closer, unaware that the stage they plan to steal has already been rewritten by two brothers who refuse to die. The war is no longer about justice or piracy. It is about destiny itself, and the world trembles on the edge of a new age. The clash of magma and fire turned the sky into a storm of destruction, while the ground beneath Marineford rippled, cracked, and burned. The Marines, once so disciplined, moved like ants in disarray, their formations shattered by the twin awakenings of Ace and Luffy. The plaza was no longer a fortress of justice. It was a burning, shaking ruin caught between the fury of Whitebeard, the chaos of two awakened devil fruits, and the desperate counterattacks of the Admirals. Each second felt like an eternity, and yet the war pressed forward, grinding soldiers, commanders, and legends together into a single maelstrom. What had begun as a public execution had become a trial by fire for the entire world government, and the outcome was slipping further from their control. Ace's battle with Akainu was the focal point of the war. They fought like gods, every collision sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Akainu's fists of molten rock tore through the air like volcanic eruptions, while Ace's awakened flames burned with a purity so intense that even magma cracked and cooled in their presence. The plaza between them became a wasteland of glowing stone and inferno. Marines who strayed too close fell screaming into pits of molten rock or collapsed from burns, while pirates could barely watch without shielding their eyes. For years, Akainu had claimed the superiority of magma over fire, but here, faced with an awakened Ace, he found no easy dominance. Ace was not simply defending, he was forcing the Admiral back, his flames fueled by desperation, by love for his brother, by the legacy of the father whose name had cursed his life. Every strike Ace landed was more than fire. It was defiance, a statement that his will would not be consumed. Luffy, meanwhile, stretched and laughed amidst the chaos, his awakened rubber body turning Marineford into something unrecognizable. He ricocheted across the battlefield, catching admirals off guard with absurd, cartoonish attacks that defied physics, yet struck with devastating power. Kizaru tried again and again to pierce his defenses, but beams of light bent and curved as though the air itself refused to obey the Admiral's will. Aokiji sent ice spikes surging upward, only for Luffy to catch them, twist them into rubbery spirals, and fling them back like toys. Even Sengoku, radiating golden light in his Buddha form, felt the disruption of order around him. The battlefield was no longer a chessboard where the Navy could move its pieces with precision. It was a madhouse, a playground for a boy whose fruit embodied freedom itself. Luffy's laughter rang out, infectious and unyielding, inspiring pirates and terrifying Marines in equal measure. Whitebeard's strength waned with every quake he unleashed, but his presence loomed larger than ever. His massive frame, scarred and bleeding, seemed to grow in stature as he quaked the air, splitting the seas and protecting the escape route he had carved into the bay. His men saw him not as a dying giant, but as the immovable father who would carry them to salvation. The world saw a man who refused to fall even with death's grip around his throat. Each swing of his Bacento was accompanied by roars of his crew, Marco blazing through the air, Jozu hurling wreckage, Vista clashing with Mihawk, and countless others fighting with renewed hope. Whitebeard's declaration that the age of his sons had arrived echoed in every strike, in every defiant shout. He was already a legend, but here, in the fires of Marineford, he was becoming immortal. The Marines, though shaken, did not surrender. They were the shield of the world government, and retreat would shame their very existence. Akainu's voice cut through the chaos, screaming for them to stand their ground, to fight until their dying breath. Admirals pushed themselves further, Aokiji freezing larger sections of the bay to block escape, Kizaru darting between firestorms to keep pressure on the pirates. Vice admirals led desperate charges. Pacifistas lined up to unleash beams of death, and cannons fired wildly into the smoke. Sengoku, fury in his eyes, struck down commanders with his massive golden fists, shouting that justice could not be allowed to falter. The Marines fought not only against pirates, but against despair itself, clinging to their duty, even as the island crumbled beneath them. In the middle of this chaos, Garp still stood at the execution platform, trembling. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight, but he did not move. Every instinct told him to leap into battle, to protect his grandsons, to fight alongside them. Every oath he had sworn demanded the opposite, that he bring them down, that he serve justice even if it meant killing his family. The conflict raged inside him, visible in his trembling frame. Marines around him looked to their hero, their legend, for guidance, but Garp gave none. His silence was louder than any roar, his stillness more painful than any strike. The world would remember this moment, the day Garp stood still as his bloodline tore Marineford apart. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the ripple effects spread like wildfire. Across the world, people watched through Denden Mushi transponders, stunned into silence or driven into shouts of triumph. In East Blue, villagers who had once known Luffy as a reckless boy saw him bending reality itself, laughing in the face of death. In Alabasta, Vivi clasped her hands over her mouth, tears streaming as she watched the friend who had saved her kingdom now saving the world in another way. In Drum Island, Chopper's old mentors stared at the screen, whispering that the boy they had once treated was standing as a god. Everywhere, the image of Ace and Luffy burned itself into history, a live performance of legend that would be told for generations. For the world government, it was a disaster beyond imagination. The Gorosei watched from Marijois, their faces grim, their whispers sharp. Two awakenings, tied to bloodlines they had long feared. The son of Roger, who they had tried to erase, now alive and blazing with fire that rivaled their strongest admiral. The grandson of Garp, the son of Dragon, revealing a power tied to the ancient myths of the world. This was not just a war, it was the exposure of secrets they had buried for centuries. They knew what the Gomu Gomu no Mi truly was. They knew the danger of the fruit tied to Joy Boy. And now the world knew it too, even if not by name. They debated frantically, but the truth was clear. Control was slipping from their hands. They could not contain this. They could only hope to minimize the fallout. Back at Marineford, the war's tempo shifted again as Akainu pressed forward with renewed fury. His magma body surged, his roars echoing as he declared that justice would prevail no matter the cost. He hurled torrents of molten rock toward the pirates' escape route, determined to cut them off, to drown their hopes in lava. But Ace stood in his way, flames burning brighter than ever. The brothers locked eyes for a moment across the battlefield, and Ace shouted to Luffy, "I won't let him through. Get everyone out of here." Luffy, grinning despite the blood on his body, shouted back, "We're doing this together, Ace. I'm not leaving you behind." Their voices carried above the roar of battle, a bond stronger than steel or fire. Marines watching felt a chill, realizing that these two brothers, united in awakening, were unstoppable. Their teamwork became the stuff of legend. Ace launched a firestorm into the sky, and Luffy stretched it, bending the flames into massive whips that lashed across the battlefield, consuming marine lines. Luffy bounced Ace's fireballs like rubber bullets, sending them ricocheting unpredictably, striking enemies from all directions. Together they created a spectacle of chaos and destruction, a combination of fire and rubber that no one had seen before. Admirals gritted their teeth as they tried to counter, but the unpredictability was overwhelming. Pirates rallied behind the brothers, their morale soaring as they realized they were fighting alongside gods. Yet, amidst the chaos, a new shadow loomed on the horizon. Ships approached the bay, dark sails cutting across the steaming waters. Blackbeard had arrived. His timing, as always, was calculated. But what he found before him was not the battlefield he had expected. He had come to claim Whitebeard's fruit, to cement his rise as a Yonko. Instead, he found Whitebeard still alive, Ace blazing with awakening, and Luffy laughing as he bent the battlefield itself. His crew gathered behind him, muttered nervously. Even Blackbeard's grin faltered for a moment as he realized the scale of what had unfolded. This was not the stage he had planned to hijack. It was a battlefield already rewritten by legends. As Blackbeard's ships drew closer, Whitebeard sensed his approach. His eyes narrowed, his body trembling with pain, but his voice thundered across the battlefield. "Teach, so you've come." His booming words cut through the fire and smoke, drawing the attention of friend and foe alike. Ace's flames flared at the mention of Blackbeard's name, his rage igniting even brighter. Luffy turned, confusion mixing with fury, sensing the malice radiating from the approaching ships. The war was already a cataclysm, but with Blackbeard's arrival, it promised to become something even greater. The question was no longer whether the pirates could escape, or whether the Marines could claim victory. The question was whether Marineford itself would survive the storm of monsters it had drawn. Now, the images burned into the world's eyes. Ace and Akainu locked in a godlike clash of fire and magma. Luffy warping reality with his rubber awakening, pushing back Admirals with laughter. Whitebeard, wounded yet unbowed, declaring his will one last time. Marines fighting with desperation, their fortress collapsing around them, and Blackbeard arriving at the edge of the war, ready to claim whatever spoils he could snatch. The war had already become legend, but the true storm was only beginning. The balance of power was about to be tested in ways even the strongest could not predict, and the fate of the world hung in the fire-lit skies above Marineford. The black ships crept into the ruined bay like vultures circling a dying beast, their dark sails catching what little light pierced the smoke-filled skies. The battlefield was already a graveyard of burning wreckage, broken weapons, and bodies strewn across shattered stone. Yet the arrival of Blackbeard and his crew felt like a fresh wound tearing itself open in the heart of Marineford. Pirates and Marines alike turned their eyes toward the horizon, and for a moment, the battlefield froze in a collective breath. Everyone knew what it meant when Teach appeared, the man who had betrayed Whitebeard, the man responsible for Ace's capture, the man who had clawed his way into infamy in record time. He had arrived at the perfect moment to seize the spoils of war. But what he found waiting for him was not the battered battlefield he had expected. It was a stage alive with fire, laughter, and quakes, a living nightmare of awakened legends refusing to die. Whitebeard's single good eye narrowed, his enormous frame leaning heavier on his Bacento as he glared toward the approaching fleet. His voice, ragged but still booming, cut across the chaos. "Teach, so you dare to crawl back here." Ace's flames flared at the sound of that name, his awakened body shimmering with hatred so fierce it turned the air around him into shimmering heat waves. Luffy, though he didn't know all the details of Blackbeard's betrayal, felt the malice emanating from the approaching crew and clenched his fists tighter, rubber crackling and stretching with every heartbeat. For the pirates, the sight of Blackbeard was a wound reopened. For the Marines, it was confusion, an interloper intruding on a battle they already struggled to contain. But for Blackbeard himself, it was opportunity, though even his grin flickered as he saw the scale of destruction already wrought. Teach laughed, his guttural "zeh-ha-ha-ha-ha" echoing across the bay, but there was an unease hidden in it. His plan had been to swoop in after Whitebeard's death, to take the Gura no Mi and secure his position as one of the four emperors. Yet Whitebeard still stood, battered but unbowed, quaking the world with every swing. Ace blazed like a god of fire, awakened and untouchable. Luffy warped reality itself, his rubber awakening bending light and steel-like toys. Blackbeard's crew shifted nervously behind him. Shiryu, Lafitte, Van Augur, and the rest, aware that this battlefield was not the weakened husk they had counted on. Still, Teach's ambition was boundless, and his arrogance knew no limits. "Perfect timing," he roared, spreading his arms wide. "Let the world witness the fall of the old and the rise of the new." The reaction from the pirates was instant. Ace's voice thundered with rage, his flames roaring higher. "Teach, you betrayed our family. You handed me over to die, and now you dare show your face here?" His firestorm intensified, a burning wall that even Akainu staggered against. Luffy's laughter stopped for the first time, replaced by a glare of pure fury. He didn't need to understand the details. Ace's hatred was enough. "I don't care who you are," Luffy shouted, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "If you hurt Ace, I'll never forgive you." The brothers' fury joined together, and for the first time Blackbeard realized the enormity of the storm he had walked into. The Marines, exhausted and battered, looked on in disbelief. Blackbeard's arrival should have been another calamity. Yet in the face of the brothers' awakening, it felt almost irrelevant. Sengoku's golden form glowed as he muttered curses under his breath, his mind racing. A third front in this war was unthinkable, yet it was happening before his eyes. The Gorosei watching through transponders surely screamed in rage, but Sengoku had no time to listen. He could only fight, and hope the Navy survived. Akainu roared as he tore himself free from Ace's flames, pointing toward Blackbeard with rage. "This war is no place for scavengers," he shouted, though his body still smoldered from the intensity of Ace's attacks. The Marines couldn't fathom how the situation had deteriorated this far, but there was no stopping it now. Marineford had become the center of the world's storm. Whitebeard, coughing blood, still found strength to raise his voice again. "Teach, you were my son, and you threw it all away." His massive quake split the sea once more, rocking the incoming ships as if to warn them away. But Teach only laughed harder, drunk on his ambition. "You're finished, old man, and once I take your power, the world will be mine." He leapt from his ship, his crew following close behind, the black void of the Yami Yami Nomi swirling around his hands. The air seemed to bend toward him, gravity itself warping under his control. But the moment his feet touched the ruined plaza, he was met not with Whitebeard's failing body, but with the wrath of Ace. Ace launched forward, his awakened firestorm blazing like a sun crashing to earth. His flames bent around him in shapes that resembled wings, a phoenix of fire unyielding in its rage. He struck Blackbeard with an intensity that shook the plaza, forcing the darkness user to stagger back, his grin finally faltering. The flames clung to him, burning even in the vacuum of his darkness, refusing to be swallowed. Teach screamed as the fire seared him, his body smoking as he struggled to contain it. "You won't take another thing from me," Ace roared, his voice trembling with fury and grief. "You took my family once, but you won't take my father. You won't take this world." His flames erupted higher, and the Marines and pirates alike shielded themselves from the blinding light. At the same time, Luffy launched himself into Blackbeard's crew with a fury few had ever seen. His rubber awakening distorted the battlefield around him, bouncing Shiryu's sword strikes back, stretching Van Augur's bullets into harmless spirals, and smashing Lafitte into the ground with a comical yet devastating blow. His fists expanded to sizes larger than giants, crashing down with unpredictable force. The Blackbeard Pirates had expected chaos. They thrived on it, but they hadn't expected to be overwhelmed by it. Against Luffy alone, they might have fought evenly, but with Ace blazing like a sun beside him, the tide was impossible to stem. Blackbeard screamed for his crew to hold formation, but his words were drowned in the roar of fire and the ripple of laughter as Luffy unleashed blow after blow. The Marines, seeing this clash, began to retreat further. Sengoku's orders rang out again. "Pull back! get to the secondary line, protect the civilians. But his words barely reached them over the roar of destruction. Many Marines simply ran, their faith broken, their fortress reduced to rubble. Others fought on, driven by duty or fear of Akainu's wrath, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They no longer believed victory was possible. Marineford was falling, not to pirates alone, but to the will of two brothers who refused to bow. The symbol of justice was cracking before the world's eyes, and the damage would last for generations. Whitebeard took the opportunity to strike again, his Bacento cleaving through the air as his quake power split the ground between the Marines and his crew, carving a wider path to the sea. His voice thundered once more. "Go! Take Ace and Luffy, and live!" His men obeyed, pushing toward the opening with all their strength. Marco soared above, rallying stragglers, while Jozu smashed aside Marines in their path. Even Crocodile lent his power, raising sandstorms to cover the retreat. Every pirate felt the urgency. This was their chance to escape, and they would not waste it. But Ace refused to leave. His flames flared as he pressed Blackbeard back again, shouting, "Not until this traitor falls." Luffy echoed him, laughing even as blood dripped from his body. "We'll finish this together." The clash reached its peak. Ace's firestorm collided with Blackbeard's darkness, light and shadow tearing the plaza apart. Luffy's rubber warped reality, stretching the battlefield itself as he slammed into Blackbeard's crew with relentless fury. Whitebeard quaked the seas, splitting the bay wider, ensuring the escape route. Sengoku fought to hold the line, golden fists clashing with Marco's flames. Akainu roared in defiance, refusing to be defeated even as his body burned. Kizaru and Aokiji battled to suppress Luffy, but his awakening bent their powers away, leaving them frustrated and wounded. And in the background, the world watched, their eyes wide with disbelief, their hearts pounding with awe. The era was shifting before them, every second rewriting history. Finally, Ace struck a decisive blow. His flames condensed into a spear of pure heat, pierced Blackbeard's darkness, searing through his chest. Teach screamed, his body writhing as he staggered back, his grin twisted into agony. His crew rushed to his side, dragging him away as Ace's fire consumed the plaza around them. "This isn't over," Teach bellowed, his voice hoarse, his ambition unbroken even as his body faltered. The darkness will rise again. But in that moment, for the first time, Blackbeard had been forced to retreat. His plan to claim Whitebeard's fruit was shattered, his dream delayed. Ace stood tall, his flames blazing as the pirates roared in triumph. The traitor had been repelled, if only for now. Marineford is unrecognizable. The plaza is a molten ruin, the bay split wide open, the fortress collapsing. Marines retreat in desperation, their symbol of justice crumbling before their eyes. Pirates surge toward freedom, carrying the hope of a new era. Ace and Luffy stand together, their awakenings blazing like twin suns, their bond unbreakable. Whitebeard, bleeding and battered, smiles through the pain, knowing his legacy is secure. And the world, watching in silence, realizes that nothing will ever be the same again. The bay still smoldered with the residue of Ace's flames, the stone of Marineford's once proud plaza, glowing orange and black like a forge that had been hammered without rest. Smoke and steam choked the air, blending with the sharp tang of blood and salt carried in by the ocean winds. The battlefield was quiet for a fraction of a heartbeat after Blackbeard's retreat, as if the world itself had taken a breath, but it was only the eye of the storm, a brief pause before the chaos returned. The Marines, though shaken, were still countless in number. The pirates, though emboldened, were bloodied and exhausted, and looming over it all was the presence of the Admirals, who, though pushed back by Ace and Luffy's awakenings, were far from finished. The war was not won yet, and every man and woman standing on that ruined island knew it. Akainu emerged from the inferno with his body still burning, magma dripping from his fists like molten iron. His eyes were filled with unrelenting hatred, his jaw clenched as if the world's weight rested on it. He had been burned, humiliated, and forced to give ground by a boy he had sworn to execute. His sense of absolute justice would not allow this insult to stand. "Pirates will not escape justice," he roared, his voice carrying across the shattered plaza. The ground beneath him bubbled and melted as his body radiated heat, each step forward like a volcano dragging itself across the battlefield. Ace turned immediately, his own flames roaring to life once more, and the two locked eyes. Their duel had not ended. It had only been interrupted. The air between them rippled with heat and tension, a silent promise that one of them would fall before the war was over. Luffy, standing beside Ace, panted heavily but grinned nonetheless. His rubber body throbbed with exhaustion, his heartbeat loud in his chest. But the rhythm carried on. His awakening bent the ground around him like waves on the ocean, and Marines who tried to charge found themselves stumbling, bouncing, or being flung into the sky like toys. He looked at Ace, sweat and blood dripping from his face, and said with the simple certainty only he could muster, "We'll beat him together." Ace gave a small smile, one filled with both pride and pain, and nodded. "Yeah, together." Their voices carried. Brothers united not just by blood, but by will. For the pirates still fighting, it was the greatest rallying cry they could hear. Whitebeard, coughing violently, leaned heavier on his Bacento, his chest heaving with each labored breath. He was dying. Everyone who looked at him could see it. But his eyes remained sharp. His voice still thundered, and his will was unshakable. He struck the ground again, sending a quake that cracked the bay wider and forced Marine ships to scatter. "Move forward," he roared to his men. "The sea is open. Escape and live." His commanders, Marco blazing through the air, Jozu tossing wreckage aside, Vista parrying strikes with elegance, all moved to fulfill his last command. The Whitebeard Pirates pushed with everything they had, their focus no longer on victory, but on survival, on ensuring their father's sacrifice meant something. Yet none of them could ignore the looming confrontation between Ace, Luffy, and the Admirals. It was a fight that would decide not just the war, but the future itself. Aokiji, calm but grim, stepped forward. His body shimmered with frost as he prepared another attack, his voice cutting through the smoke. "This war must end here. If those two escape, the balance of the world will be shattered." He raised his hands, massive ice spears forming in the air above, ready to rain down. Kizaru, brushing blood from his mouth, smirked even in exhaustion, his voice dripping with mockery. "They're flashy, I'll give them that. But flashes burn out quickly." His body glowed, beams of light flickering as he readied to strike. Sengoku, towering in his Buddha form, added his voice to theirs, golden energy radiating. "Do not let them leave. Justice demands their capture." The Admirals and Fleet Admiral aligned in a single front, their combined might enough to terrify even legends. Against them stood Ace, flames blazing hotter than the sun, and Luffy, laughter echoing as his rubber body warped the world itself. The clash was cataclysmic. Aokiji's spears of ice fell from the sky, only to vaporize instantly in the inferno of Ace's flames. Kizaru's beams of light shot across the battlefield, but Luffy stretched and bent the very air, curving them back like mirrors, sending explosions into marine lines instead. Sengoku's massive golden fists struck down, but Luffy's rubber ground absorbed the impact, bouncing the shockwaves back with ridiculous force. Akainu, roaring in rage, hurled magma torrents that consumed everything in their path. But Ace met him head-on, fire and magma colliding in bursts that melted stone and blinded onlookers. The plaza quaked under the sheer weight of their battle, and even the sea seemed to retreat in fear, waves crashing against the walls as if trying to flee. Pirates and Marines alike could only watch in awe and terror. It was no longer a war of armies. It was a clash of gods. The sheer scale of the battle defied comprehension. Walls of flame, floods of magma, pillars of ice, beams of light, golden shockwaves, and rubber distortions all collided, creating a battlefield that looked like the end of the world. Every strike could level a fortress. Every clash could sink a fleet. Men who had thought themselves strong realized how small they truly were in the face of such power. And yet, amidst the chaos, the brothers' voices carried above all else. "I'm not afraid of you!" Luffy shouted as he launched himself at Sengoku, his fists stretching impossibly far. "You can't stop me!" Ace roared as he met Akainu's magma with an inferno of equal force. Their defiance was absolute, their will unbreakable. Still, the Admirals were not so easily defeated. Aokiji adapted quickly, freezing the air itself to sap the strength from Ace's flames. Kizaru darted between attacks, his light-speed movements too fast, even for Luffy's unpredictable distortions. Sengoku's golden body seemed unshakable, each blow radiating divine force. Akainu pressed harder, his fury boundless, determined to annihilate Ace once and for all. Slowly, step by step, the Marines forced the brothers back, their combined might overwhelming even awakened power. Luffy staggered, blood dripping from his mouth, his body straining under the unnatural demands of his fruit. Ace gritted his teeth, his flames flickering as exhaustion gnawed at him. For all their strength, they were still human, still mortal, and the Admirals pressed this advantage mercilessly. Whitebeard saw this and knew his time had come. His vision blurred, his limbs heavy, but his will surged with one final burst. He raised his Bacento high, his voice booming across the battlefield. "This is the age of my sons!" He slammed the weapon down, unleashing a quake so massive it split Marineford in two, the very island cracking apart. The ground heaved, buildings collapsed, and the sea poured in through gaping fissures. The Admirals staggered, their formation breaking, and for a moment, the pressure on Ace and Luffy lifted. Whitebeard coughed blood, his body trembling, but he smiled through the pain. He had given them the opening they needed. "Go!" he roared again, his voice filled with both command and love. "Ace, Luffy, live!" His men cried out in anguish, but they obeyed, surging forward to cover their father's final stand. Marco swooped in, his phoenix flames shielding Ace from a beam of light. Jozu hurled debris at Aokiji, forcing the Admiral back. Vista crossed blades with Kizaru, sparks flying as he held the Admiral at bay. Even Crocodile, sneering as always, raised a sandstorm to obscure the battlefield, snarling that he refused to let the Marines claim victory. Every pirate gave everything they had left to protect the brothers, to buy them the chance their father had carved open. Ace and Luffy, panting and battered, looked at Whitebeard, their eyes filled with pain. "Father," Ace began, but Whitebeard cut him off with a final smile. "You're free now. That's all I wanted." His voice was softer, but it carried, echoing in their hearts. Ace's flames faltered for a moment as tears welled in his eyes, but Luffy grabbed his hand, squeezing with all the strength he had left. "We'll live," Luffy said firmly. "Together." Ace looked at him, saw the determination in his brother's face, and nodded. They turned, side by side, and charged toward the escape route Whitebeard had opened. The Admirals roared in fury, their combined power surging to stop them, but the pirates threw themselves in the way, sacrificing everything to protect their captains. Marco screamed as he clashed with Akainu, his phoenix body burning. Jozu fought with his last strength, even as ice crept up his arm. Vista's blades clashed with Kizaru in a storm of sparks, and Whitebeard, towering even as he fell, swung his Bacento one last time, splitting the very sky as if to defy heaven itself. The world would remember that image. The old Titan dying but unbowed, protecting his sons with the last of his strength. As Ace and Luffy ran, their awakening still blazing, the pirates surged behind them, carrying the wounded and shouting with every ounce of their will. The Marines, broken and bloodied, tried to regroup, but their fortress was gone. their faith shattered. Sengoku roared orders, but few could obey. Garp still stood frozen, his tears hidden behind clenched fists, his silence louder than any word. The Denden Mushi broadcasts continued to roll, transmitting every moment to the world. The escape of Ace and Luffy, the defiance of Whitebeard, the crumbling of Marineford. These images burned themselves into history, impossible to erase. Marineford itself collapses around them, half submerged, aflame, and broken. Whitebeard prepares to meet his end. The Admirals struggle to salvage justice from the ruins. The pirates fight with desperation to flee, and Ace and Luffy, side by side, carry the weight of the future on their shoulders. The Age of Pirates has not just been reignited, it has been reborn in fire and laughter. The world will never be the same again. The roar of collapsing stone and the hiss of boiling seawater filled Marineford as the island groaned under the weight of Whitebeard's final quake. Half the plaza lay shattered, the once immovable walls of justice broken into jagged cliffs plunging into the frothing ocean. Pirates scrambled across the unstable terrain, their cries of defiance mingling with the screams of wounded Marines. Above it all, the clash of legends still echoed. Flames, magma, rubber distortions, beams of light, ice storms, and golden shockwaves colliding again and again, painting the sky in apocalyptic colors. The war had not ended with Whitebeard's quake. It had only entered its most desperate phase. Whitebeard himself stood like a crumbling mountain, his chest split open with wounds, his breath ragged, but his presence still vast. His final quake had bought Ace and Luffy their path to freedom, but the Admirals were far from finished. Akainu, his body cracked and smoldering, clawed his way back through the rubble, magma dripping like blood. Aokiji rose from frozen debris, his calm face concealing the strain of endless combat. Kizaru flickered into existence again, his mocking smirk brittle but present. Sengoku's golden form towered above them all, his fury undimmed. Justice, though battered, still had teeth. The pirates surged toward the bay, Marco's phoenix flames blazing as he carried wounded comrades, Jozu throwing aside obstacles with sheer brute force, Vista and the commanders hacking through marine lines. Jinbe, his massive frame covered in blood, fought like a tidal wave, clearing paths with crushing blows. Even Buggy, stumbling and shrieking, found himself at the head of groups of escapees, his accidental survival interpreted by his followers as divine courage. The tide was moving, but the path to freedom remained perilous. The Admirals aimed their final fury at the retreating pirates, and Ace and Luffy found themselves the last shield standing between their family and annihilation. Akainu's roar cut through the chaos like the howl of a volcano. "You will not escape. Pirates die here." He hurled a barrage of molten fists that turned the ground into rivers of fire. Ace leapt into the air, his body blazing brighter than ever, his awakened flames bending into colossal wings. He spread them wide, and a storm of fire rose to meet the magma. The collision shook the heavens, a storm of molten rock and burning light exploding in midair. Ace's body trembled with exhaustion, but his fury gave him strength. Every strike against Akainu was not just an attack, it was vengeance, a refusal to let his story end in chains. "You'll never kill me again," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage and grief. The flames bent to his will, forming beasts of fire that lunged at the Admiral, clawing and biting with a life of their own. Luffy, beside him, slammed his fists into the ground. The plaza stretched like rubber, rippling outward and launching Marines into the sea. He spun his arms like windmills, creating whirlwinds of rubberized air that sent cannonballs spiraling harmlessly away. His awakening distorted the battlefield further, bending walls and weapons into shapes that obeyed his laughter more than physics. Kizaru darted in, beams of light piercing the smoke, but Luffy caught them with stretched hands, curving them back like elastic mirrors. The explosions that followed struck Marine ships, sinking them with their own firepower. Aokiji unleashed a storm of ice across the bay, freezing retreating ships, but Luffy stomped the ground, turning the ice into bouncy sheets that shattered under their own pressure. "We're not stopping!" Luffy shouted, his grin defiant even as blood dripped from his lips. "I promised I'd save Ace, and I'm not breaking it." The Admirals bore down harder, their combined might enough to crush entire armies. Yet the brothers stood unyielding. Every clash between Ace and Akainu melted the earth into molten rivers. Every battle between Luffy and the others bent reality itself. The Marines struggled to regroup under Sengoku's orders, but their formations collapsed under the sheer unpredictability of awakened power. What should have been a disciplined army was now a scattered mob, their faith in victory shattered. Many retreated, some fought desperately, others simply collapsed in exhaustion. The image of Marineford, once the strongest bastion of justice, reduced to chaos by two brothers, seared itself into the minds of all who witnessed it. Whitebeard, watching through fading eyes, felt his chest swell with pride. His vision blurred, but the sight of Ace blazing and Luffy laughing filled him with peace. He had carried the weight of an era, and now he could let it go. With one final smile, he whispered to himself, "They will carry it on." His legs finally gave way, his Bacento falling from his grip, and his massive body collapsed with a thunderous crash that silenced the battlefield for a moment. He was gone. The world's strongest man had fallen. Yet even in death, his presence loomed larger than life. He had died, standing, never on his knees, a titan whose final act was to give his sons a future. The silence that followed his fall was broken almost instantly by Ace's scream. Flames erupted wildly from his body, his grief and fury igniting into a blaze that turned the skies crimson. "Father!" he roared, his voice shattering into the crackle of fire. Akainu grinned through the heat, seizing the moment. "That's right, your father's dead, and now you'll join him." He hurled another magma fist, larger than before, aiming to pierce Ace's heart again. But Luffy leapt, his body stretching impossibly far, his fist colliding with the magma in a rubbery explosion that redirected it skyward. The attack lit the heavens like a second sun, but the brothers stood untouched. Luffy landed beside Ace, his grin softer now. "He bought us our chance," Luffy said, his voice firm. "Don't waste it." Ace clenched his fists, tears streaming down his soot-streaked face, and nodded. His flame steadied, his will hardened. "Then we fight. For him, for everyone." The Admirals regrouped, fury etched into their faces. Aokiji summoned glaciers from the sea, hurling them forward like mountains of ice. Kizaru flickered into blinding beams, aiming to pierce Luffy's heart. Sengoku's golden fists rose once more, divine judgment ready to fall, and Akainu, molten fury incarnate, surged forward like a living volcano. But the brothers did not flinch. Together, they charged. Ace's flames wrapping around Luffy's rubber fists, creating strikes of blazing fire that bent and stretched with impossible force. Their teamwork was seamless, born not of practice, but of bond. Every strike they launched was devastating. Every counter they made was unpredictable. Admirals staggered under their combined assault. Marines faltered, and the pirates roared in triumph. Marco soared above, his phoenix wings blazing as he shouted, "This is our chance! Push through!" The Whitebeard Pirates rallied, their spirits reignited by their father's final stand and their brother's defiance. Crocodile unleashed a massive sandstorm to obscure the battlefield, while Jinbe smashed marine lines with tidal waves of fishman karate. Vista carved open paths with blades of unmatched elegance. Jozu hurled debris like meteors, and even Buggy, still miraculously alive, found himself hailed as a hero by followers who mistook his cowardice for brilliance. The pirates surged forward, and the bay became a flood of desperate, determined escape. Yet the Marines fought on. Vice admirals rallied behind their leaders. Pacifistas unleashed devastating laser barrages, and countless foot soldiers threw themselves into the fray despite their despair. Sengoku's voice boomed commands, and Akainu's fury drove them harder. This was no longer about victory. It was about denying the pirates their freedom, no matter the cost. The clash intensified, the sea boiling, the air cracking, the ground quaking. Marineford itself seemed to weep, its stones crumbling under the weight of gods at war. And then, as if the world demanded one final twist, Shanks and his crew appeared on the horizon. Red sails cut through the smoke, and the aura of another Yonko pressed down on the battlefield like a tidal wave. Marines froze, pirates gasped, and even the admirals faltered. Shanks stepped forward, his calm presence radiating authority. "Enough," he said simply, his voice carrying across the ruined bay. "This war ends now." His men stood behind him, their weapons ready, their confidence absolute. It was not a plea, but a declaration. The era of Whitebeard had ended, but the age of chaos had only begun. The sight of Ace and Luffy, awakened and unbroken, standing together at the heart of Marineford, was already rewriting history. And now Shanks had come to ensure that history would move forward into the next age. Whitebeard's body fallen but unbowed, Ace and Luffy blazing with awakening, admirals staggering but unyielding, pirates surging toward freedom, marines clinging to duty, and Shanks standing at the horizon, his presence a promise that the world was entering uncharted waters. Marineford was no longer a battle. It was a legend, a turning point, the day when the age of freedom and fire truly began. The sound of creaking masts and snapping sails carried across the bay as the Red Force cut through the smoke and debris, its crimson flag rising like a banner of fate. For a moment, the battlefield, so consumed by chaos, paused as eyes turned toward the horizon. Shanks had arrived, his aura pressed down on friend and foe alike, an invisible weight that made the air itself feel heavier. Pirates gasped with relief, marines stiffened with dread, and the admirals narrowed their eyes in caution. Few men could change the tide of a war just by stepping into it, but Shanks was one of them. His presence was a declaration in itself. The balance of the world was shifting, and the age of legends was not over. Shanks leapt onto the shattered plaza with his usual calm expression, his single eye scanning the devastation. He took in Whitebeard's fallen body, the flames and magma still clashing, the rubber distortions bending the battlefield, and the Marines' broken ranks. He saw Ace and Luffy standing side by side, their awakenings blazing in defiance of the entire world government. For a moment, he let the silence linger. Then, with a voice that carried across the battlefield like a steady wind, he said, "That's enough. This war ends here." His words were not shouted, but they had more force than the roars of giants. Pirates stood taller, marines faltered, and even the admirals felt the weight of his will. Akainu sneered, magma dripping from his body as he glared at the newcomer. "Shanks, another pirate, another cancer on this world. Do you think your words mean anything here?" He raised his fists, molten fury radiating from him. Justice will not be silenced by one more criminal. But Shanks's calm gaze didn't waver. "You've made your point, Sakazuki," he replied evenly. "But if this continues, you'll burn more than pirates. You'll burn the world itself." His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, Griffin, and the tension between them crackled like a storm waiting to break. Luffy's eyes widened when he saw Shanks, his grin breaking across his bloodied face. "Shanks!" he shouted, his voice filled with childlike joy even in the middle of hell. The memory of their promise flashed before his eyes. The straw hat, the vow to surpass him, the bond of mentor and future. Ace glanced at his brother, confusion in his eyes. He had heard stories of the man who inspired Luffy, but seeing him now, calm amidst chaos, he understood instantly. This was someone who could hold back the tide of war with nothing but presence. Shanks gave Luffy a small smile, the kind of smile that said everything without words. The Marines scrambled for answers. Sengoku's golden form loomed as he shouted, "Do not falter. He's just another Yonko. Justice still stands." But his voice rang hollow, drowned out by the weight pressing down on everyone's hearts. Aokiji's breath misted in the air as he muttered, "He's too calm. He knows something." Kizaru, though smiling as always, flickered nervously, his tone mocking but strained. "Oh my, what a troublesome guest. It looks like the party's getting a little crowded." The battlefield that had been in flames only moments ago now stood in uneasy silence, everyone waiting to see who would move first. Shanks's crew fanned out behind him, their presence equally commanding. Ben Beckman raised his rifle, his sharp eyes daring any Marine to make a move. Lucky Roo and Yasop stood at his side, grins masking the deadliness in their posture. These weren't just crewmates, they were veterans, men whose strength rivaled entire fleets. Their calm confidence told the world one thing: if the fight continued, the Marines wouldn't just lose to Ace and Luffy, they'd lose to Shanks as well. And that was a cost they couldn't afford. Ace's flames dimmed slightly as he steadied his breath, his exhaustion catching up with him. Luffy bent the ground beneath his feet unconsciously, the rubber surface rippling with his heartbeat. The brothers looked at Shanks, waiting for a signal. But Shanks didn't tell them to fight. He looked at them with quiet pride and said, "You've done enough. Leave the rest to us." His voice wasn't a command. It was reassurance, a reminder that they didn't need to carry the entire world on their backs in this single moment. But Luffy clenched his fists, shaking his head. "No, I'm not leaving until Ace is safe." Ace gave a small laugh, weary but resolute. "Guess we're both stubborn, huh?" The Admirals weren't ready to retreat. Akainu stepped forward again, fury radiating like molten rock. "Retreat? Never. Pirates die here. Whitebeard's death is not enough. His sons will be buried with him." He raised his fists, magma boiling in the air. Aokiji and Kizaru tensed beside him, Sengoku's golden aura blazing brighter. The Marines rallied what courage they had left, their chants of justice echoing weakly but with determination. The air grew heavy, the standoff tightening like a rope about to snap. And then the ground shook once more. It wasn't Whitebeard this time. It was Ace. His flames flared to life, brighter and hotter than before. His grief and rage transformed into resolve. He stood tall, his body surrounded by fire that burned so purely it seemed to light the sky. "You won't take another thing from me," he declared, his voice strong despite the cracks. "I will live. I will protect my family. And if you want to stop me, then come and burn." His awakening blazed like a second sun, and even Akainu faltered for a heartbeat. Luffy stepped beside him, his rubber body bouncing in rhythm with his laughter. "And I'm going to be king of the pirates. No matter what you throw at me, I'll never stop." His body warped and stretched, the battlefield itself seeming to dance with his heartbeat. The drums of liberation pulsed louder, a sound no one could explain, but everyone could feel. Marines shivered. Pirates laughed through their tears, and Shanks smiled knowingly. He had seen this before. This was the echo of history, the sound of freedom itself. The Admirals attacked again, unwilling to yield. Akainu's magma surged forward like a volcano erupting. Aokiji raised glaciers from the bay, ice towering like mountains. Kizaru flickered into beams of light, faster than the eye could follow. Sengoku's golden fists descended with the weight of justice itself. And Ace and Luffy met them head-on, fire and rubber colliding with the might of gods. The plaza exploded in light and sound, the shockwaves rattling ships in the harbor and cracking the sky above. Shanks's crew moved instantly, intercepting Marine reinforcements, their weapons flashing as they cut down lines of soldiers. Ben Beckman's rifle crack rang out, halting Kizaru mid-movement, a rare moment where the light men hesitated. The Red Hair Pirates made their presence known. If the Admirals wanted to finish this war, they'd have to go through them too. For minutes that felt like hours, the battlefield became a storm of clashing titans. Ace's firestorms consumed magma, melting the ice and casting shadows across the entire bay. Luffy's rubber awakening bent light and shockwaves back, turning the Admirals' power against them. Shanks's crew covered the retreat, ensuring the pirates had a path out. Marines screamed as their fortress crumbled further, but still they fought, driven by duty and fear of their leader's wrath. The world watched in awe the Denden Mushi broadcasts, capturing every impossible moment. And then Sengoku's voice boomed again, though it carried less certainty than before. "Enough! Marines, pull back! Protect what remains of Marineford." His golden form flickered as he realized the truth. They could not win this battle. They had already lost too much. Continuing would not be justice. It would be suicide. His words spread quickly, carried down the chain of command, though many Marines hesitated. Akainu roared in defiance, his fury boundless. "No! They must die! They must die here!" But even he could not ignore the sight of his soldiers faltering, of his fortress collapsing, of the world's eyes judging. He struck at Ace one final time, his molten fist colliding with a wall of fire, but Ace did not yield. Their clash ended in a stalemate, the air between them burning and cracking, but neither falling. Shanks stepped forward then, his voice cutting through the noise. "This war is over. Take your wounded and leave. Any further blood spilled here is pointless." His aura surged, pressing down on Akainu, on the Marines, on the very battlefield itself. Even the Admiral of Absolute Justice found himself gritting his teeth, unable to move forward against that overwhelming will. The Marines began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster as the reality of the order sank in. The war was ending, not in victory, but in survival. The pirates surged toward the sea, carrying their wounded and their dead, their spirits burning with both triumph and grief. Ace and Luffy stood at the center, their awakenings still blazing, their bond unbroken. They had lived. They had defied death itself. And though Whitebeard's body lay cold, his will lived on in them, in every pirate who escaped Marineford that day. The world would remember this, not as the day Ace died, but as the day Ace and Luffy stood against the world and survived. As the Red Force loomed larger in the harbor and the Marines withdrew, the final image burned into history was clear. Ace blazing like a sun, Luffy laughing with the drums of liberation in his chest, Shanks standing calm with sword in hand, and the Marines retreating from their own fortress. The age of pirates had not only been reignited, it had been reborn. The world would never be the same again. The war that had raged like the end of days began to quiet, though the silence was not peace, but exhaustion. Marineford lay in ruins, its proud walls broken into jagged cliffs, its plaza a melted scar of fire, magma, ice and rubber distortions. Smoke rose in black columns, mixing with the steam that hissed from fissures where the sea boiled. The cries of the wounded filled the air, Marines groaning in pain, pirates dragging comrades to their feet, and Denden Mushi broadcasting the scene to every corner of the world. What had begun as the public execution of Portgas D. Ace had ended in catastrophe for the Navy and in legend for the pirates. The son of Goldie Roger lived, his flames blazing with awakened power. Monkey D. Luffy had revealed himself not just as a reckless upstart, but as a force of freedom itself, his rubber awakening bending reality like a toy. And Whitebeard, though dead, had secured the survival of his sons. The Marines retreated reluctantly under Sengoku's order. Many soldiers resisted, eyes burning with hatred, but the sight of their fortress in ruins, their admirals battered, and the red-haired pirates standing calm forced them to obey. Sengoku's golden form shrank back into his human body, his shoulders heavy, his face etched with defeat. He had fought for justice all his life, but this day had been a wound deeper than any battle. Garp stood beside him, silent, his fists still trembling, tears hidden in the shadow of his cap. He had not moved to strike his grandsons, nor had he moved to save them. His inaction was its own torment, and he bore it alone, his heart torn between duty and blood. Akainu burned with fury, his body still smoking, his eyes wild. He wanted to charge again, to rip Ace apart, to burn Luffy to ash, to destroy every pirate in sight. But Shanks's steady gaze and his crew's readiness kept him at bay. Even his absolute justice could not overcome the truth. The war was over. He snarled curses, molten fists clenched, and turned his rage on his own men, shouting for them to never forget this humiliation, to redouble their hatred of pirates. His words rang hollow to some, but others clung to them like a lifeline, desperate to turn their shame into resolve. Aokiji stood apart, frost drifting from his body as he surveyed the wreckage. His face betrayed little, but his mind raced. He had seen awakenings before, but never like this. Never two at once. Never with such devastating consequences. He thought of balance, of order, of the fragile stability the Navy tried to uphold, and he wondered if it could survive what had been unleashed. Kizaru, flickering with dimming light, tilted his head lazily, but even his mocking tone was subdued. My, what troublesome kids. The world's going to have quite the headache. His words, though casual, carried the weight of truth. The pirates pressed toward the bay, their morale surging despite the devastation. Marco flew overhead, carrying wounded men with his phoenix flames, his own body scorched and battered, but his spirit alight. Jozu dragged comrades across the fractured stone, his diamond body cracked but unbroken. Vista carved paths with his blades, protecting the weaker with every strike. Jinbe smashed through marine lines, his massive arms clearing space with relentless determination. Crocodile unleashed sandstorms to obscure their retreat, snarling at anyone who dared call him an ally, though his actions spoke otherwise. Even Buggy, to his own disbelief, found himself hailed as a hero, his bumbling survival broadcast across the world as courage. Ace and Luffy stood at the heart of it all, their bodies trembling, their awakenings still flaring with residual energy. Ace's flames dimmed and brightened with each breath, his grief for Whitebeard tempered by the promise of survival. Luffy's rubber distortions rippled less violently now, his exhaustion dragging at him, but the rhythm of his heartbeat still echoed, steady and defiant. Together, they moved with their crew, protecting those too weak to fight, striking down any marine who tried to block their way. Their bond was a shield stronger than steel, a force that even the Admirals had failed to break. Shanks and his crew closed ranks, their calm professionalism ensuring no final ambush could succeed. Ben Beckman's rifle followed Akainu's every movement, his finger ready on the trigger. Yasop's sharp eyes scanned for threats, while Lucky Roo's massive frame loomed like a wall. The red hair pirates did not need to fight. Their presence alone was enough. Shanks himself stood at the edge of the plaza, his sword resting easily at his side, his eye calm but unyielding. He spoke again, his voice carrying like a steady tide. Take your dead, take your wounded, and go. This war has already cost more than enough. His words were not addressed to the Marines alone, but to everyone watching. The world had seen enough blood. The pirates reached the bay, ships rocking in the broken waters as survivors scrambled aboard. Marco landed softly, setting down the wounded. Jinbe hoisted men onto decks with brute strength. Vista stood guard until the last had boarded. Crocodile vanished into the chaos, unwilling to linger under the red hair flag. Buggy posed dramatically, his followers cheering his leadership. And still Ace and Luffy stood, refusing to board until the last of their allies were safe. Ace's flames burned bright enough to keep Marines at bay, while Luffy's rubber warped cannon fire back into the sea. they would not leave anyone behind. At last, the Whitebeard Pirates were aboard, their ships pulling away from the ruined bay. Marco looked back at the plaza, where Whitebeard's body still stood like a mountain, unbowed even in death. Tears stung his eyes, but he held his head high. Their father had given them this chance, and they would not squander it. Ace gripped the railing of his ship, flames flickering as he stared at the island. He whispered softly, too quiet for anyone but Luffy beside him to hear. "Thank you, Pops." Luffy placed a hand on his shoulder, his grin small but certain. "We'll carry it forward." The Marines stood in stunned silence as the pirates sailed away under the protection of Shanks. Sengoku clenched his fists, knowing the broadcast had already spread their humiliation across the seas. He could hear the whispers of the world, that the Navy had failed, that the Whitebeard Pirates had escaped, that 2 awakenings had been born in the heart of justice itself. He could already feel the balance slipping, the era shifting beneath his feet. Garp remained silent, his fists bloody from clenching so hard, his heart breaking quietly as he watched his grandsons disappear into the horizon. Akainu raged, swearing vengeance. Aokiji turned away, lost in thought. Kizaru smirked faintly, though even he seemed unsettled. The Navy had survived, but it had not won. And across the world, the reaction was explosive. In taverns, men slammed mugs together, roaring with laughter and awe. In villages, children cheered at the sight of Luffy and Ace standing defiant, their images burned into Den Mushi broadcasts. In kingdoms oppressed by the Navy's shadow, whispers spread like wildfire. Perhaps the age of the Marines was ending. In pirate crews across the seas, captains raised their sails higher, inspired by the legend unfolding before them. And in the halls of Marijois, the Gorosei watched in fury and fear. Their greatest execution had become their greatest failure, and the names of Ace and Luffy now burned across the world like firebrands. For the revolutionaries, the news carried even more weight. Dragon, standing in the shadows of his base, looked at the transponder broadcast with a rare smile. His son had not only survived, but revealed a power the world could not ignore. The son of the revolutionary leader, the grandson of Garp, the brother of Ace. The boy was now a man who could bend the very world with his will. Dragon whispered softly, "The storm has come." His commanders nodded, their resolve hardening. The world government would not recover easily from this. Back on the retreating ships, exhaustion settled like a blanket over the survivors. The wounded were tended to, the dead laid out with quiet reverence. The air was heavy with grief for Whitebeard, but also with relief, even joy that Ace had lived. Men who had wept in despair now laughed through their tears, clapping each other on the back, shouting that they had survived the greatest war of their lives. Marco stood at the helm, his face stern, but his voice steady as he gave orders. "We're not safe yet. Keep moving. We'll mourn later. For now, we live." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of command, and his crew obeyed. Ace sat at the ship's edge, staring into the sea, his flames flickering low. Luffy sat beside him, chewing on meat handed to him by a trembling cook, his energy somehow returning even as his body bled. Ace looked at him, his voice soft. "You almost died for me." Luffy grinned, his mouth full. "That's what brothers do." Ace laughed, though tears blurred his vision. "You really are reckless, aren't you?" Luffy nodded, swallowing his food. "Always." For a moment, the weight of war lifted, and they were just brothers again, laughing on a deck under the open sky. But both knew the truth. The world had seen them. The Navy would never stop hunting them now. Blackbeard would return, stronger and more determined. The balance of power among the Yonko was shattered. The seas would become more dangerous than ever. Yet neither faltered. Ace's flames steadied, his awakening humming in his veins. Luffy's rubber body pulsed with the rhythm of freedom, his awakening alive even in his exhaustion. Together, they looked toward the horizon, knowing the world was waiting. Marineford in ruins, Whitebeard dead, but unbowed, the Navy humiliated, the pirates escaped. Shanks declaring the war's end, and the brothers alive, awakened, and carrying the weight of a new era. The world would call it the day justice faltered, the day the age of pirates roared louder than ever, the day Ace and Luffy defied fate. And though the seas ahead promised storms unlike any before, the bond between them burned brighter than fire and stronger than steel. The seas did not rest after Marineford, even as the wounded were tended, as the dead were buried, and as ships limped back to safe harbors. The ripples of that war spread faster than the tide. Every island, every tavern, every marine base, and every pirate ship repeated the same words with awe and disbelief. Ace and Luffy had awakened. The son of the pirate king and the grandson of the marine hero had not only survived, but had turned the greatest execution in history into a catastrophe for the world government. The death of Whitebeard was still a scar, but his sacrifice was no longer remembered as failure. He had died standing, protecting his sons, and those sons had lived to carry his will forward. For the pirates who escaped, the days that followed were heavy with grief and exhaustion. The Whitebeard Pirates, now leaderless, gathered on the open sea to count their losses. Marco, quiet but resolute, assumed command by default. His voice was calm as he ordered repairs, divided rations, and tended to wounds, but his eyes betrayed the grief he carried. He had lost his father. His family was broken, and yet his duty was clear: to keep them alive. Around him, Vista, Jozu, Aizo, and the others leaned on one another, mourning but unyielding. They had seen their captain fall, but they had also seen Ace and Luffy rise, and that gave them hope that their family spirit was not gone. Ace struggled with the weight of it all. He sat at the edge of the deck, staring at the horizon for hours, his flames flickering weakly in the sea breeze. He was alive, but his father was gone, and guilt gnawed at him. He had been the reason for the war, the reason for so many deaths. Yet every time despair threatened to swallow him, he remembered Whitebeard's final words, the quake that had opened their path, the smile that had told him to live. Luffy stayed close, never letting Ace drift too far into silence. He laughed, ate, fought with crewmen over food, and forced Ace to share in it, reminding him with every grin that life still burned. Their bond was stronger than guilt, stronger than death, and though Ace wept in the quiet hours, he did not fall into despair. He had too much left to protect. News of Marineford spread like wildfire. In the New World, pirate crews raised their sails higher, inspired by the sight of two brothers defying the Navy. Some declared themselves followers of Ace. Others shouted Luffy's name as the future pirate king. Blackbeard nursed his wounds in secret, his crew bitter and furious at their defeat. His plan to seize Whitebeard's fruit had been foiled, his ambitions delayed, but his hunger only grew. He swore vengeance on Ace, vowing that their next clash would not end in retreat. For now, he licked his wounds, but in the shadows he schemed, watching the world descend into chaos. The Yonko balance shifted overnight. Kaido and Big Mom watched with interest, their hunger for dominance sharpened by the fall of Whitebeard and the rise of new threats. Kaido roared with laughter when he heard of Luffy's awakening, his voice echoing across Wano. "Another monster is born," he bellowed. Big Mom licked her lips, whispering about the sweetness of capturing such powerful souls. They did not mourn Whitebeard. They only saw opportunity. And Shanks, calm as ever, returned to his ship after escorting the pirates to safety. His crew asked him what he thought of the future, and he simply smiled. The world's about to change, and I think I know who's going to lead it. In Marijois, the Gorosei sat in fury. Their execution had been a failure broadcast to the entire world. Their fortress was in ruins, their admirals bloodied, their fleet admiral exhausted, their authority shaken. Two awakenings had appeared in the bloodlines they feared most, the son of Roger and the fruit tied to Joy Boy. They debated late into the night, whispering of Imusama and ancient weapons, of erasure and control, of how to stamp out the fire before it spread. But in their hearts, they knew the truth. The fire was already a wildfire, and it would consume the seas, whether they wanted it or not. For the Marines, the aftermath was bitter. Sengoku resigned soon after, his body and spirit broken by the humiliation of Marineford. Garp followed quietly, his heart too heavy to fight on, though he did not show the tears he shed in private. Akainu fumed, demanding harsher justice, calling for total war against pirates, his voice louder and more dangerous than ever. Aokiji grew more distant, his doubts heavier, his faith in the system fractured. Kizaru remained enigmatic, though even his mocking smile seemed dimmer. The rank-and-file soldiers, those who had watched their fortress burn and their admirals stagger, felt fear in their bones. Justice no longer seemed unshakable. The pirates had shown them a future where even gods could bleed. Across the seas, the world responded with chaos. Kingdoms once obedient to the world government whispered of rebellion. Pirates who had lived in the shadows rose boldly. The revolutionary army celebrated quietly, their leader Dragon smiling faintly as he watched his son's legend grow. He knew the storm had begun, and he knew the world government would struggle to contain it. Sabo, in some distant land, clenched his fists with pride and longing, unaware of just how close his brothers had come to death. The seas boiled with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. The age of pirates was no longer an echo of Roger. It was alive again, burning brighter than ever. And for Luffy, the journey was only beginning. He sat with Ace at the bow of their ship, his straw hat tipped forward, his grin wide despite the exhaustion etched into his body. He thought of his crew, scattered across the world, waiting for him. He thought of the promise to meet them again, stronger than before. He thought of the vow to be Pirate King, and he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. But he laughed anyway. For him, the war was not the end, but a beginning, the first step into a new age. Ace sat beside him, his flames warm, his eyes steady. He had been given a second chance, and he would not waste it. He would protect his family, carry his father's will, and carve his own path. Together, they looked at the horizon, where the sun burned through the smoke, and they knew the seas ahead would be more dangerous than ever. But they also knew they would face it, side by side. The legend of Marineford would be told for generations. Some would call it the Navy's greatest failure, others the pirates' greatest triumph. Some would remember Whitebeard's death, others Ace's survival, others still the laughter of Luffy echoing above the chaos. But all would agree on one truth. It was the day the world changed, the day two brothers awakened, the day justice faltered, the day a new age began. And so, as the ships sailed into the horizon, as the Marines rebuilt their fortress, as the Yonko plotted their next moves, and as the world whispered of freedom and fire, the seas trembled with anticipation. The balance was broken. The age of legends was not over. It had only just begun. And that concludes this what-if journey. Imagine it. The war at Marineford rewritten, not as tragedy, but as the birth of something new. With Ace and Luffy standing together awakened, defying the Navy, surviving where fate had marked them for death. Their victory reshaped the seas, humiliated the world government, and inspired a new age of piracy and freedom. This is the power of a single twist of destiny, the difference between despair and hope, between death and legend. Thank you so much for watching and sticking with this long exploration. If you enjoyed this what if, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Would Ace have become Whitebeard's successor? Would Luffy's awakening push him faster toward being Joy Boy? Would Blackbeard have ever recovered? I'd love to hear your theories. Until next time, keep dreaming of the seas, keep imagining new possibilities, and as always, thanks for setting sail with me.